You're not going to give a should you really trace.
No, you shouldn't. Tracing doesn't teach you the process of actually making the art. If you trace, you'll just stay at the same art level.
I'm probably shooting myself in the foot because this video I'm gonna make, but hey, people are allowed to grow and change, so maybe it won't be as bad as I think. Hey, hello, it's Kiyoshi and welcome back. So recently I've been thinking about how to improve as an artist, and because of that I've been spending a lot of my time studying different art techniques. One of the techniques I learned is to trace over a reference image. Now, I personally don't have a problem when other people do this method, but it's always been a gray area for me. In the past, I talked about how it didn't work, but looking back, is that true or was I just simply unaware? Now, before we continue, feel free to like and subscribe. I don't post often, so it'll be good to know whenever I do post a new video. Now that I'm done shamefully promoting myself, let's get on to the subject at hand. Tracing is one of the most, if not great topic when it comes to art related discussions. When you start out as an artist, you may have heard someone say something like, "Oh, you shouldn't trace someone else's work," which in all fairness is a good advice for any small artist to know. However, there will be some young artists who don't follow this advice and instead choose to trace over an artwork they find cool and or want to try and replicate. They might post it online, but they'll never really try to profit off the trace work. On the other hand, however, you have artists who trace other people's work to try to sell them off or to gain fame from, which I would say, don't do that. It's a really shitty thing to do. Because of this negativity surrounding tracing, it's automatically assumed that it's a bad thing. But let's say, for example, that someone was tracing to learn another person's art style. Then, is it considered bad? Now, when a younger artist trace, they usually trace over the outline and the shape of the figure, and because of that, they usually don't understand how the figure works or even function. Now, let's say that the artist does understand basic anatomy, but they want to study it in more depth. Would tracing be okay to do then? This is where tracing starts to become a bit more gray, and why tracing is talked about a lot in the art community. Using someone else's work as study shouldn't be frowned upon, especially to those who are actively looking for a way to improve their art. In my opinion, I think it's fine to trace, only to learn and study anatomy, or even the art style of the artist. These studies should be kept privately, and honestly, I have my fair share of private trace artwork I use as study material when I was studying other people's art style. But there's also those people who say that you shouldn't be tracing other people's work, even for study. Now, usually they say this not to be mean or to upset people, but they want the person to learn and make the anatomy or drawing by themselves, which in all fairness is an understandable argument. It's bad to just study art simply by relying on other people's work. If you become too reliant on other people's work, you'll have a harder time standing by yourself as an artist. I want to discuss multiple different kinds of tracing, as it's important to know and understand each one. Tracing over artist's work is the first one I want to talk about. I've already been talking about it a lot, so I'll keep this one relatively short. I do believe that it's okay to trace other people's work only if you are actively using it as a way to study. If you do this for self-gain, then you should honestly just stop. I will say that if you do trace other artists' work as a form of studying, keep it private to yourself and don't post it online so you don't have to deal with any issues with people calling you out in the future. So, when it comes down to tracing over real life images, it's a bit more calm, but also more confusing than tracing over someone else's work. I see a fair amount of people actually doing this, usually when it comes to more difficult poses, and in my opinion, I think you should trace over real life images first as a study, and break down the pose and anatomy, then draw without tracing over the reference image. I did this before when I made my Fry drawing from Splatoon 3. Notice how I didn't directly trace it and instead use it as a way of referencing. I also used to trace myself when I was first starting out drawing. I didn't learn anything from it because I didn't have any idea about what I was doing. Another thing I want to bring up is the usage of 3D models for posing. From what I've seen, a lot of people are actually pretty accepting to those who use 3D models. It's understandable since a lot of new art softwares actually provide 3D models for artists to adjust, change, and use in their art piece. I see it often used by webcomic makers so the artist doesn't have to spend too much time sketching out the pose they want their character to be in. I believe the only problem with 3D models is that it may not work with characters who have more abnormal anatomy. If you want to use a 3D model for posing, you would either have to make the model yourself or commission someone to do it for you. This can be a problem for some, but I don't believe it's as major as people think, or as I think personally. I also want to add how people use 3D models to help with drawing buildings and other structures. I believe this case is a bit better than 3D models because it's easier to make the basis of a structure than a person. I'm happy that people are actually using 3D models to help themselves with their art. It's smart that people are using their tools to the utmost limit. Now, here's something people tend to dislike: the usage of bases. Bases serve as a way for people to not focus on making the structure of the body, but instead to focus more on the design aspect, in my opinion at least. I mainly see people use bases for furries and other meme-related poses. These two are fairly popular because there are some artists who want to design a persona but don't want to spend the time practicing making art, which is understandable. They want to focus on the design aspect, not the process of making the art. The meme-related poses are mainly just for fun. I've seen it used a lot for fandoms, so I don't have anything really against those. I believe bases are mainly just for fun or a way to help with the designing process and not focus too much on making the entire thing. I only recommend using bases as a way to take a small break from doing art or to quickly design something. In the long term, it's better to be able to design the character by yourself. You can change and morph the character as much as you want. So a while back, I asked people on Twitter about what were their thoughts about tracing, and I gotta say I had some pretty good responses. So the first one is from Apollo. People are more scared of tracing than they should be. It feels like animation and webtoon is a necessity. As long as you don't trace other people's work for anything other than practice, with permission, you shouldn't be too afraid to do it. Apollo is correct about how tracing in animation and webtoon are necessary. Like I mentioned earlier, having 3D doll models make the process of making webtoons much faster, as you aren't spending too much time sketching and drawing the body. Having the process already done for you will help save time in the long end. Now the next one comes from I Hate Friday. I think it's helpful when people are learning to draw. I agree with Fridays and what they're saying. Tracing is a useful tool that you can learn how to draw from, especially if you want to mimic another person's art style. I also recommend that after you're done tracing, try to draw by yourself using it as a reference. Now this one comes from Zeolite. For practice, it's fine, whether you're an amateur or a professional. It can be used to try a new style or to better understand your own capabilities. It becomes a problem when you claim the piece as your own or you reference heavily without giving credit to the original artist. I very much agree with how they said it and how it can be used to try a new style or to see new capabilities. Sometimes we artists tend to forget, myself included, is that we don't know our capabilities, and because of it, it makes it harder to grow. And if we want to go past our limits, we must first know what our limits actually are. This one comes from Devil Advocate. I trace occasionally to try out things and then recreate it on my own once I got a grip. I don't publish trace art, even if part are traced. I want to learn from it and not profit. I have done something quite familiar. I did this when I was drawing my Fry drawing from Splatoon 3. I first traced over my reference image so I could understand it a bit better, and after it, I used them both as a reference for my final piece. I also appreciate how they want to learn from it and try not to profit off trace work. This one comes from Jamian. I don't mind if people trace art, especially if it's done by children who are fans of something. I also think it's fine when kept private. For art growth, I think referencing, just constantly looking while drawing, is more helpful than plain tracing, and I personally don't like doing it. I always get annoyed that it does not look exactly like the original, but this is just my personal problem and should not keep anyone else from doing it. I appreciate how they add how it's fine when kept private and how tracing is alright, especially when it's done by children. I can agree with that. Children don't draw to become the next greatest artist. They usually draw because it's fun and they want to trace a drawing to put on the fridge, and I don't have a problem with that. I also appreciate how they said for art growth that referencing is more important to art growth straight out tracing. And they are correct in some form. There will be times where you can't trace, so referencing is the next best step. For taking part and responding to my tweet. I'll post their Twitter accounts in the description so you can check them out for yourself. Now, here are my final thoughts about tracing. I don't believe it's as bad as it's widely said, but you should still be careful while doing so. Tracing is like a double-edged sword, and because of it, you have to know how to use it properly. Know when and not to trace, but also know how to trace. Remember that a person can't grow solely by a single means, So for those who study by tracing over 3D models, photos, or even other people's art, I recommend getting out of your comfort zone and trying drawing freehanded or using their images as a reference instead. Remember that everyone will have a different view on tracing, so make sure to respect and understand one another. Now that I have finished talking, I want to thank everyone who took part in the video. Hearing other people's opinion really helped me when it came down to making the video, as it is important to learn and understand other people's view. And with that being said, thank you for listening to me talk. Hey, hello, and welcome to the end card. I probably should have made this video a lot sooner, but you know me, I tend to slack a bit when it comes down to making videos, but I'm happy that I was able to get this video out there. October is coming up, so be prepared for a little bit of a spooky theme coming down to not just my YouTube channel, but to my Twitter as well. And just because of that, make sure to check out my Twitter as well. And like and subscribe to the video if you like it. If you don't, feel free to dislike it. I won't stop you. But yeah. Keep doing art, keep doing what you're doing, and make sure to have a nice good day. Yeah, that's not much to say. Bye-bye.